Good morning. I want to share with you a story that came to mind just now. Um, Someone responded to my guide on how to engage panhandlers, and it's actually a family member who I didn't know, but is also going out and helping people on the street, giving them money to pay their bills and things like that. And they said that the comment that stuck out was, that people are just often closer to being homeless than they realize. And it reminded me of a time at Cityteam that I haven't shared yet, and I just realized that I haven't. So I thought I'd do a quick video here about the time that I slept in the homeless shelter at Cityteam right when I started at the company, before anybody really even knew who I was. I decided to I realized I didn't know much about homelessness at all. I'd never been homeless or addicted, and here I was now working for a ministry that helps homeless and addicts and people who are just really at the bottom. And so I decided that I would just go in and immerse myself in that world, even just for a short time, and stay over in the shelter. And I didn't shave even for longer than I have it now, and I wore the oldest like paint clothes that I had. And I just went down to the rescue mission, and in the afternoon I lined up outside like the homeless do right there in San Jose. And at that time, people just start kind of coming out of the woodwork, so to speak, literally coming down the train tracks, some pushing shopping carts like you would expect, others walking up with, a little briefcase, even a laptop, one guy, and, all different types of folks. And I stood in line, and because I was a newbie, or a first timer as they're called, I got preference. So I was in one line that pretty much assured me that I was going to get in, and then others who are sort of there more frequently or chronically, they're in another line, and it's just based on availability. And one thing that struck me that I want to share with you is that there was an Indian guy who was in front of me, and people kind of came over and talked to me a little bit because I was like a new guy, and I'm young, and they just were saying like, how'd you get here, like, why are you here? And I got a chance to ask that of a guy that was right in front of me, this Indian guy. And it was the craziest story, but as I've told it over the last year or 2 or 3 years since this happened, a lot of people who work in this field have said it's pretty typical of how someone becomes homeless. So I thought it was worth sharing. This guy actually worked at Intel, so he was an engineer at one of the top tech companies in the San Francisco Bay Area. And this was a job that he held a lot of pride in. And in fact, his family, he told me most of them were still back in India. When he got this job and was able to move to America, he was the man, And so when he was laid off and lost his job unexpectedly, happens pretty often, especially in emerging industries, he took it really, really hard. And his wife, who he lived with, saw him start to drink and become very depressed, and he just couldn't handle it. And there's a common theme with folks who end up homeless, that something happens in life, the death of a family member, loss of a job, some kind of abuse, something that happened in their childhood that they just can't handle. And so this guy couldn't handle the loss of this job, and he just started to drink, and eventually became unmanageable. His wife kicked him out of the house, couldn't live with him anymore, and he lived with a friend for a while. Same thing. Eventually, his behavior resulted in him being kicked out of that situation. Slowly, just burning these bridges of the closest people to him. Ended up living in his car, and then told me that eventually, through not paying upkeep on the car, not keeping it registered, getting tickets, the car was eventually towed away. And he told me the first day that he was homeless on the street, he thought, all right, this is just going to be a day or two until I figure things out, And what happens is, as he was on the street each day, it started to sink in that this might be where this might be his reality. He started to lose hope, he told me. And by the time I talked to this guy, he said he'd been on the street for 3 years, homeless. And, you know, again, just imagine someone from tech, engineer, well educated, well compensated, going down the ladder, so to speak, to eventually being at, you know, in essentially the gutter, and then all kinds of things start happening in that place. You know, where, I'll give you an example. He had gotten some eczema, a rash, okay, a very common rash on his arm. In fact, I occasionally get it myself. He got eczema, but normally you treat it and it goes right away. Well, he left untreated. This stuff now covered a large part of his body, and it was really nasty looking. And you know, I got to see that when I you know, checked in and then showered. Everybody takes a shower at Cityteam, and I showered with that guy and many others, and you just see the disease and the rashes and the amputations and the things in on the street there that are pretty sobering. But you know, I thought that story was pretty telling about how there's this progression that often happens that lands people on the street. And so, you know, I thought that was important. But also another story in that same evening. So I check in, I go in and get a shower. We go into, at Cityteam, a worship service, right? They're faith-based, one of the few good faith-based programs in the Bay Area. And you have a worship service before you go into to bed. And during that service, some of the guys that are in the recovery program get up and lead the service. So it's real close to home in that the guys that are up teaching the word and singing and leading songs were just homeless themselves in many cases a few months ago, which is real powerful. And you see the implications of that happening in that community where there's a sort of camaraderie that you wouldn't get if these homeless had gone to a church, perhaps that more of a mainstream church where they would probably be looked at a little bit. Here they're accepted in a real interesting way. But the story I want to share is when they did an offering. You know, you think an offering amongst the homeless, like that's kind of crazy. But the reality is I met the pastor, Sharon, who was a colleague of mine at Cityteam, who told me why she instituted that. And she put that in place because she wanted to give the homeless the same opportunity to worship with their tithes and with their sacrifices, you know, even when they didn't have anything. And so I saw this play out where they passed the bucket or the hat or whatever it was, and the guy next to me, I saw him like reach in his pocket, and he looked up to the guy passing the bucket, and he said, you know, I only have $10. Can I get change? You know, and the guy said, you know, sure, yeah, you know, we don't have it right now, but we'll come back to you and give you change. And so he put his $10 in the hat, and then it started to get passed around, and I saw him just kind of like watching it and just thinking, and I was just thinking to myself, like, can you imagine, like, you're only $10, you don't have a job, you don't know where anything's coming, like, and yet he's watching the hat pass, and then finally they come back to him, and he says, no, I just keep it, you know, just keep the whole $10. And I just thought, you know, what was going on in his spirit, you know, like as he's given everything he has to the Lord in that moment. You know, I just thought that, you know, it's like a parable. It's right out of the New Testament, right? The widow coming and giving her little pennies. And you see that kind of stuff, you know, despite the struggles and the challenges on the street. I think you see this stuff here more often than you would realize, that there's a certain kind of community and a kind of sacrifice and sharing and camaraderie even that you don't always see in richer communities. And so I thought that was pretty remarkable. And then the final story I'll tell you is, okay, so I go from the worship service. Now I go into the bunk room, right? 50, 60 beds. And, you know, I'm a little nervous, if I'm honest with you. If I remember back, I was a little bit nervous. Didn't have any real reason to be. I felt safe. It was clean. But I just couldn't sleep. You know, I just laid in bed, didn't really talk to anybody, but I just listened. You know, I just listened to these men just talking to each other, you know, and the conversations they were having. I saw an old veteran who was had a leg amputated work himself into bed. In the middle of the night, one of the guys eventually, an ambulance had to come to take a guy out of there. Apparently, he has a lot of problems, elderly gentleman. But what really struck me was a conversation I heard, two guys talking, right? So one guy is up on the top bunk and he's talking to the guy below him, and he's telling him how he got a job and he's actually doing all right now. In fact, he makes enough money, he says, to have his own apartment. And you'd think, all right, this guy can get an apartment. Like, why would he stay in a homeless shelter? Like, why is he staying with Cityteam, right? But he explained that he shares custody with his kids, and they come visit him on the weekends, every weekend or every other weekend. And he said, if I had an apartment, I wouldn't have any other, that would be it. Like, I wouldn't have enough money to do anything else. And when the kids come, we'd literally have to sit around the apartment, and instead, his thinking is, I'll stay homeless. Don't let the kids know. I keep up this sort of charade, I guess, or this sort of game that where they come, and every time they come, we can go have pizza, or I can take them to, some great America or a theme park, or we can do fun things together. We can go camping. We can have fun. And I thought, man, that sucks. Like, this guy, he's out there, he's working, and there's a lot of guys like that. They show up and they're working, they're trying to get jobs, and yet they're still in a position in society where they can't make it. In the Bay Area, if you've ever lived there like I did, that it's expensive. I mean, even a small apartment, 1-2 bedroom apartment cost $2,000 or more, and that's not even including transportation, food, all the other things, medical expenses and what have you. And so I thought at that moment, it just hit me that homelessness looks different than I thought. That there's guys out there working that you're interacting with during the day that you don't even know are homeless, that are homeless, and the reason sometimes is really as selfless as it can get. I mean, this guy just wants to make memories with his kids when they come visit, and so he stays homeless for that reason. So I just leave that with you all. I was encouraged by my family member who told me that she was out there doing this. That's what made me think of this story that I hadn't shared. And my hope and my prayer really in sharing this stuff is that you start to break down in your mind any stereotypes or barriers around homelessness and the people you see on the street, the panhandlers, and that you're not afraid of them, that you start to think about how you can actually look them in the eyes and that you can minister to them, that you don't think you have the answer, but you can actually look at them as a human being, that you can love them, even get to a place where you can serve them, where you can consider them, where you can even get to a place where you get to hear some of these stories. I fell into a job. I feel like God put me in a job for a few years where I worked in homelessness and I worked on the street, and I got to hear a lot of these stories, and they're incredible, and it changes your life, changes the way you look at life, changes the way you look at other people around you. And as a Christian, this is on you to do this. I don't think that you can say, I write a check to my church and we serve the poor, therefore I serve the poor. I don't think it works that way. I think the scripture calls us each to minister to the poor outside of our home. And maybe you now have isolated yourself from poverty, and you live in a community that's gated, or it's far from the poor of your town or your city. But I actually believe it's on you to find this stuff and to minister wherever you're able and wherever you're called, at least a couple times, to start to give God a chance to reveal Himself to you in that struggle. Okay, He does say in Matthew, he talks about, when you give, and I think also in Mark, he talks about when we minister to those who don't have food or clothing or a drink, that we're actually ministering to Him. That's Jesus talking. So I think that writing a check or supporting a ministry doesn't cut it. I feel like we all need to do this stuff. So I hope that this comes across that way. I hope it blesses you. I hope it challenges you a little bit. And I hope ultimately that you do something about it. All right. Great talking, sharing this story. Let God get the glory, and have a great day.